Is China decoupling from the outside world? The Chinese regime says it wants the opposite. But sweeping lockdown measures are driving foreigners and their businesses out of the country. At the same time, more restrictions are on the way for Chinese citizens going abroad, while the values praised by the regime drift farther from Western principles. Shanghai's lockdown takes a toll on the auto industry. Not a single car was sold in the city in April. And Beijing may be stepping up its aggression near Australia. A Chinese spy ship has been spotted off the Australian coast. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. The Chinese regime is tightening the country's border under the zero-COVID policy. Some Chinese citizens even had their passports cut up at border entries. Let's take a look.
China's National Immigration Administration announced last Thursday it will strictly follow Chinese Communist Party leader Xi Jinping's zero COVID-19 policy in its border control operations. That applies to both those entering and exiting the country. The agency says it will conduct stricter screenings before allowing those going abroad for study, work, or business from leaving China. Chinese internet users revealed that earlier this month, Chinese border agents interrogated every passenger on a flight before they were allowed to enter China. The border agents asked them in detail why they went abroad, what they did abroad, and why they returned to China. If their answers were deemed unsatisfactory, the border agents would cut up their passports, making them invalid, so the passengers had to stay in China. Some passengers had to promise that they would not go abroad in the future to avoid having their passports invalidated. A Chinese man who left the northern Chinese city of Dalian for Japan over a month ago tells NTD what he saw at the airport before his departure.
I saw passports being cut up when people came back to China. I saw over 20 passports being cut up at the border entry in Dalian alone. If you could get the documents to leave China, get them as soon as possible. If you can leave quickly. This country is now really in an unstable state. It's closing its doors, and the control is getting tighter and tighter.
Some agencies that support Chinese students who plan to study abroad say that the Chinese regime has stopped issuing passports for elementary and secondary school students who want to study abroad. China's immigration agency last week denied that it is suspending passports and invalidating foreign green cards. They say they are still providing services for Chinese citizens making necessary trips abroad. But earlier last week, China's immigration agency said it would restrict non-essential exits of Chinese citizens.
But China's lockdowns aren't going away, it seems, and it's taking a serious toll on the economy. Shanghai reported a stunning 100% drop in car sales in April. Shanghai's Automobile Sales Association says not a single car was sold last month. Almost all dealerships in the city were closed. This figure is a stark contrast to April 2021, where over 26,000 were sold. NTD's Don Ma has more.
A 100% drop in car sales in Shanghai is the zero-COVID policy's latest impact on China's economy. This policy led to the closure of factories, it slowed down economic activity, and it disrupted supply chains. A number of news outlets are now reporting on concerns whether China's economic downturn will cause a global recession. Ethan Yang, political scientist and economic analyst at the American Institute for Economic Research, says that the worries may be slightly exaggerated.
In the sense that I don't really see China playing as much as a role as most people might be worried about. I don't think that a recession in China and only China would create a global recession.
Yang says China is just one piece of the puzzle. Other factors like rising interest rates in the US and the conflict in Europe should also be considered when talking about a global recession.
So what people are worried about is not just China's economy, but they're also looking at Europe and the US for what's basically a perfect storm of rising interest rates in the US and a war in Europe. And so I think most people are worried about that. Those three things, China, Europe, and the US, both having independent problems, could cause a global recession.
If the two other things go well, meaning the US can contain inflation and Europe can contain the war, then Yang says China's COVID lockdowns alone likely won't put the world into a recession. Don Ma, NTD News.
But on the other hand, Yang said it would be a different story if China expands its lockdowns from Shanghai to the entire country for months. In a rare move, China's state-run Xinhua news agency appealed to foreign companies to stay in China. Many American and European companies are considering moving their businesses out of China. Their factories are having to suspend operations under Beijing's zero-COVID policy. And supply chain issues are also adding fuel to the fire. Xinhua says that the zero-COVID policy has brought a safer and more stable environment not only to China, but also to the whole world. And they say this policy shows the advantage of China's political system and has strengthened the confidence of long-term investors. Xinhua adds that the loss foreign companies are suffering is only temporary and that it's a necessary loss for stopping the virus from spreading. Beijing is strengthening its COVID-19 restrictions. Authorities have so far avoided calling it a lockdown, but the rules in place don't seem far off from one. With streets empty, many residents are confined to their homes. Those who can leave the house are stockpiling food and essentials. Beyond that, if a single person tests positive for the virus in a residential building, all building occupants are forced out of their homes and into designated quarantine facilities. One incident in Beijing was caught on video. Residents were informed at 2 a.m. that they were being forced into a quarantine center. Health workers rushed them to pack their bags and board a chartered bus. The facility was a 1-hour drive away, but 7 hours later, people were still waiting inside the bus, parked in front of a hotel-turned-quarantine center. Residents on the bus could be heard criticizing the facility's management in the clip. Once residents enter the isolation center, they're faced with other uncertainties, including how long they're forced to stay there. Over in Shanghai, a recent incident was caught on video. Last week, a restaurant owner lost control after seeing his restaurant closed and blocked off with metal barriers. He had run the restaurant for over 10 years to make a living and support his family. Nearly 3,000 people are unable to withdraw money from their banks. Their deposits reportedly amount to 1.2 billion yuan, or close to $180 million. The problem recently popped up in multiple community banks in China's central Henan province and eastern Anhui province. And the situation has been ongoing for nearly 2 weeks. Chinese media officially listed 5 community banks, all of them currently unable to complete cash withdrawals. 4 of the 5 banks are controlled by the same parent bank, and all 5 have been fined for non-compliant lending in the past. After the withdrawal problem surfaced, some noticed that a company has been working with the 5 banks to illegally absorb huge public deposits. This, according to a Hong Kong newspaper. All banks in China are controlled by local authorities. One bank clerk from China told us that for community banks, the risk of failing is high. To protect his identity, we're using his surname only.
These community banks in China belong to local governments. They are run by local governments. They are different from state-run banks. Bankruptcies are allowed for these community banks. For example, if you deposited 1 million yuan in the bank, when the bank is broke, it'll only pay you $500,000 as compensation.
Wang is a columnist for the Epoch Times Chinese language edition. He says the community bank regularly faces significant risks.
Some community banks are controlled by major shareholders. The banks perform transactions for major shareholders, launder money for them. Those are tremendous financial risks, and these banks never solve the risk control problem in this regard.
Chinese community banks are also known as banks for rural areas. Farmers make up the bulk of their clients. According to public data, as of the end of last year, there are over 1,600 such banks in China. A Chinese spy ship has been spotted off the west coast of Australia. It took an unusual route without notifying the authorities. Australia's defense minister says it was an act of aggression.
Australia's Defense Department has tracked a Chinese surveillance vessel. That was when it operated near the country's northwest continental shelf. Defense Secretary Peter Dutton described the ship's move as unprecedented.
I think it is an aggressive act, and I think particularly because it has come so far south. For it to come south of Exmouth is without precedent, and for it to hug the coastline the way in which it has and heading up toward the north. Now, we don't know whether it deviates and goes directly north, but at the moment it's heading in a northeasterly direction.
In a statement, the Defense Department said they identified the vessel as a Dongdiao-class auxiliary intelligence ship dubbed Haiwangxing. Dutton condemned it for not contacting the Australian authorities about its approach, a standard international protocol.
The Chinese warship with an intelligence gathering capability. It's obviously very strange that it's come this far south, and it's hugging the coastline as it goes north. And its intention will be to collect as much electronic intelligence as it can, and that's, as I say, just very unusual.
In response, China's foreign ministry accused Australia of using, quote, frightening words just to cause alarm. A regime spokesman claimed he was unaware of the situation, arguing that China has always abided by international law. The spy ship emerged just days after Beijing's foreign minister Wang Yi announced his planned trip to the South Pacific, notably to formalize a security treaty with the Solomon Islands. Meanwhile, relations with Beijing are also dominating debates around Australia's upcoming federal election.
How does the Chinese Communist Party really see the war between Russia and Ukraine? A speech about Ukraine by a former Chinese ambassador, Gao Yishen, might provide a glimpse into Beijing's perspective. The remarks were published by a Beijing-backed media outlet in Hong Kong. But the article appeared to be quickly censored in all Chinese media outlets and social media. In the speech, Gao admitted Russia already failed and has lost Ukraine completely. He said the Ukraine war has put an end to the post-Cold War era and opened a new international order. He added that Russia is getting weaker, while Ukraine will join the Western world, and that other countries that are part of the former Soviet Union will lean more towards the U.S. side too. Gao said he believes Japan and Germany will soon be free of the restrictions stemming from World War II, and that they'll more actively strive to become major political powers and speed up military development. Touching on the U.S. and other Western countries, he said they are expected to vigorously promote substantial reform of the United Nations and other international organizations. And if that reform fails, involved countries may start anew. That's all for today's China in Focus on YouTube. We're now sharing a shortened version of our program here, after being demonetized for more than a year. Here's what to look out for in our second half. How an ancient Chinese spiritual belief overcomes war and connects people in Ukraine, Russia, and America. And an indigenous community in Peru is protesting against a Chinese-owned copper mine. Buying up mines outside China's borders, Beijing is still pursuing resources around the world. Our full episode can be watched on our partner platform, Epoch TV. To sign up for a free 14-day trial, please click the link down below. Thanks for watching China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer, and see you tomorrow.
Every once in a while, something comes along so masterful, it leaves you in awe. So inspiring, it changes your life. So beautiful, you wish it would never end. When that happens, it's something not to be missed. Shen Yun, an all-new production every year.
The performance was enchanting.
I feel better about the world. I feel uplifted. It touches you. It really does.
The expertise of the dancers was really, really strong.
To know that it was live music was really fantastic.
We didn't want to miss this.
Make sure you see it.
Have to come. Life-changing.